us, O Lord, O God, as we pray for those who represent the people in the parliament of our nation, and for those who serve in places of influence and authority. And may all the pressures brought upon them, may they follow your guidance and seek to do the thing that is right. Through them, your will may be done for this nation, the honor of your name, through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. Look gracious upon us, O Lord, O God, in this time of our nation's sorrow and loss. Give us comfort, keep us steadfast, and hold our faith. Enable us to find in you our refuge and strength, now and always. Amen. Say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This House is now in session. Minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, July 21st, 2020, and Tuesday, July 20th, 2020, to be confirmed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that those minutes be taken as read.
Do we second that?
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby confirmed.
Announcements by Your Honor the Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency the Governor General. Petitions, papers.
Mr. Speaker, I'm commanded to lay the Police Special Constables Discipline Regulations of 2020.
Government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of standing orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. The said standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. Honorable Member for St. Joseph.
Government business, sir.
Government business is now the order of the day.
Order number 4, sir. In the name of the Honourable Acting the House, to move that the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee to consider the grant of sums of money for the service of this item.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that you do not leave the chair and that this House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into Standing Finance Committee. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it.
This House is now in Standing Finance Committee.
Madam Chair, the intention is, once we're in committee, to do orders 4 and 5. But we will start with order number 5. in the name of the Honourable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, to move the passing of a resolution to grant the sum of $840,000 from the Consolidated Fund and to place it at the disposal of the government to supplement the estimates 2020 to 2021 as shown in the supplementary estimates number 4, 2020 to 2021, which form the schedule to the resolution. Head 30, Office of Attorney General, in the amount of $840,000.
Mr. Speaker, this supplementary sum, $840,000, is for the purpose of covering part of the fees of a consultancy contract that the government of Barbados, through my ministry, has entered into with the Association of Certified Anti-Money Laundering Specialists. We call it ACAMS. The context for this, Mr. Speaker, is to support the skills of the Barbadians who are engaged in addressing the issues raised by the Financial Action Task Force in our last report. This chamber will have heard on several occasions the challenges that we are currently facing with the Financial Action Task Force. To give the chamber a brief history, the Financial Action Task Force started, in fact, I think during the time when Sir David Simmons was Attorney General, so it goes back quite far. And at that time, we formed a regional grouping called the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. Over the last 2 or 3 decades, sir, the international community has been focused on money laundering and in...
Honourable Member, just to remind you, it's the Standing Finance Committee, so
Sorry.
the speaker is no longer here.
I stand chided, Madam Chair. As I was saying, over the years, the Financial Action Task Force has been the global standard-setting agency for determining, firstly, whether or not a country has met the minimum standards required in the fight against money laundering and terrorism. Of course, sir, it is convenient for the purposes of administration and convenient for the purposes of getting through this very complex exercise that we function in groupings. So Barbados is a part of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. There are other groupings in Asia, in Europe, in Africa. And twice a year, we have plenaries in Paris to do an assessment of where these countries are. But a lot of the work is actually done by smaller groupings. Now, where does Barbados stand in all this? Mr. Speaker, we often, Madam Chair, we often speak about a lost decade. And in the 10 years prior to our taking office, little or no effort or attention was put into the issue of addressing money laundering concerns and addressing the issue of terrorism. True, we did pass some pieces of legislation, but when we came to government in May of 2018, one of the things that immediately confronted us was the fact that Barbados had, in 2017, received a very, very low rating in our report. In fact, the vast majority of categories saw Barbados being below what was considered to be a reasonable standard. Our task, therefore, in addition to all of the other things that we were doing, required us to immediately set about raising the standard of Barbados in terms of compliance. And just as we did in relation to tax matters, we spent a lot of time and effort bringing to this chamber a raft of amendments to various pieces of legislation, all of which were intended to home in on addressing those deficiencies that existed within the context of our anti-money laundering fight and our terrorism fight. Now, Mr. Speaker, Madam Chair, please accept my apologies. Hopefully I'll get it right before I'm finished. Madam Chair, in terms of some of those deficiencies, some of those statutory deficiencies, we had to make amendments to the Companies Act. We had to make amendments to various other pieces of legislation, and they were all made. Took a lot of effort to get them done, but they are all made. And therefore, Barbados achieved, and I'm quite happy for that achievement, for the first time, a significant level, a significant degree of technical compliance with the requirements. The challenge is that it is relatively easy to achieve technical compliance. Technical compliance, Madam Chair, would refer to whether you have passed a piece of legislation here or whether you've passed a piece of legislation there, whether you have implemented this rule or whether you've implemented that rule, whether your financial intelligence unit is doing this or whether your financial crimes investigation unit in the police is doing that. That, Madam Chair, is in the nature of a check-in-the-box exercise. And I apologize to all the hardworking people for reducing it into those terms, because it's far more than that. But the point is, in relation to technical compliance, the assessment is, do you have this law, do you have that law? However, that is not the end of the process. In order to reach the level required by the FATF, we also have to have something called effectiveness. And effectiveness, Madam Chair, is where it begins to get a little slippery. Because effectiveness as a gauge or as a standard requires us not just to say that we have a particular law in place, but it requires us to say that we are actually working the law, that the law has not only been implemented, but that the law is also being used. So, for example, Madam Chair, one of the laws that we were required to pass is the Proceeds and Instrumentalities of Crime Act. And I'm very happy that we passed that piece of legislation, because it is an important arsenal in the hands of the government, in the hands of the police and the DPP, in order to be able to effectively deal with a fight on crime, not just money laundering issues. Our previous Proceeds of Crime Act only allowed us to seize proceeds of drugs and so on. But we recognized that that was inefficient. That wasn't even scratching the surface. So we really needed to have the ability to seize proceeds and instrumentalities of crimes of all kinds. And so we passed the law. But this next level of assessment requires us to demonstrate that we are actually seizing proceeds of crime, that we are actually seizing instrumentalities, those tools, those things that are involved in criminal activity. So, for example, just so that the chamber is clear, I think you have an understanding of proceeds of crime is if you are a drug lord and you go and buy a car, that's proceeds of crime. Also money laundering. But on the other hand, instrumentalities of crime would be if you storing weapons in a car, anything that you use to carry out a criminal act, that is an instrumentality of crime, and we can therefore seize that as well. And in that statute, we also included unexplained wealth. So all of these are those are the technical things, but for effectiveness, we have to show that we are actually prosecuting people. We have to show that cases are going through the court system for money laundering. And I'm very happy to know, to be able to report to the chamber that of late, we've actually been able to seize some assets successfully. We have frozen assets also successfully. And we have, I think if you notice the pages in the press, you would know that an increased number of people are being charged with money laundering offenses. So that's the effectiveness side. So across many of the areas that we are required to improve, effectiveness is the key, and that is what we are embarking on going forward. Now, the FATF has assessed Barbados, and they've found that in several areas we remain deficient. But those areas are associated with the effectiveness side of things, not the technical compliance side of things. Now, the FATF has given us 2 years to work our way through that process and to get out of this state of enhanced due diligence. The process was consultative. We had meetings with their side. We argued with them that we were effective in this area, and we showed statistics, and they took that off. There were others where they felt that we were not effective enough, and therefore those things have kept on. Now, some of the practical difficulties that we've had in effectiveness have had to do with our core system. So the FATF says, well, we want to see convictions. Now, let me be frank. They operate on the misguided assumption that in order to show that you are fighting something, that you must have convictions. Our approach to it is very different. We feel if you are successful in fighting it, then the number of convictions that you should have will be few, because you've successfully fought it. It's like fighting, Madam Chair, you're a doctor. If you are fighting malaria, the proof of your malaria fight is not a large number of malaria cases that you're treating. The proof of your malaria fight, of the success, is that you have no malaria cases. Now, I know that's simplistic, but that's how we see it. But they're requiring us to establish and to give evidence that we have a large number of prosecutions in certain areas. Now, Madam Chair, when we came to government, we found that the backlog of cases to be tried in the criminal division of our High Court was in the region of just under 1,000, and dated back to 2007. Now, at that time, Madam Chair, we only had 2 High Court judges who were doing criminal matters. So you would end up with each one having to do about 500. And when you work out that each High Court judge in the criminal division will do a few cases a year, maybe a dozen, maybe 20, it will take you years and years. Those people will retire and not be able to get through that 1,000 and more added every day. So we recognized that appointing additional judges to the High Court was not just important for our purposes in terms of improving the dispensation of justice, in terms of helping us to wrestle criminal activity to the ground. There was also the spill-off benefit to being able to move cases through the criminal system faster, so that we were able to satisfy the requirements of the world standard setting body. So our imperative, let me make it clear, nobody's to say that we appointed judges to satisfy the FATF, because I know we would hear that in a few minutes. we determined that we needed to appoint High Court judges to improve the dispensation of justice in Barbados. We understood the importance of wrestling the number of criminal cases to be tried to lower digits. But in appointing those High Court judges, we had the spill-off benefit of being able to defend our regime by saying, we having appointed additional High Court judges, we can now expect to get cases going through the system faster. And we've also increased the number of prosecutors. So when we are measured by the FATF, they look at all these factors. How many judges do you have to do criminal cases? How many prosecutors do you have to prosecute them? All of these things. They look at how many people do you have in the financial crimes investigation unit of the Royal Barbados Police Force, because they want to determine whether all of these things you've put in place in law are being effectively used as tools. So, we're satisfied, Madam Chair, that we are working well along that process, but it would be remiss of me if I did not mention to this chamber what the EU has done to us in this situation. I've said, Madam Chairman, that we've agreed a course of action with the FATF, which would take us 2 years. Now, as ambitious Bajans that we are, we know we don't want to be in this process for 2 years. We're trying to get out in a year. COVID has presented some difficulties, but we're trying to get out in a year. However, Madam Chair, the EU, European Union, because of the fact that we are in a state of enhanced due diligence in the FATF process, remember FATF is Financial Action Task Force, the global standard setting body. The EU, following one of their pieces of legislation, has put Barbados on a blacklist in relation to money laundering. Now, let me say to this chamber that over a year ago, we fought with the EU in relation to naming and shaming jurisdictions. And we argued with the EU that you can't name and shame us in a process where there's no opportunity for consultation. If the EU has a view that we've fallen short, we should have an opportunity to say to them, no, we haven't fallen short. This is our state of affairs. Now, let's work through this, Madam Chair. I am informed, but let's back up a little bit. The EU blacklist is predicated on the basis that countries that have not met a particular standard, the FATF standard, represents a large risk, a high risk to their financial system because we don't adequately fight money laundering. So a little Barbados represents a big threat to the EU and is therefore blacklisted. When we look at the statistics, and the economists will have better figures than I, but I believe I was informed that the money supply of Barbados is less than 0.00001% of the global money supply. In other words, if we fell off the face, if our money supply evaporated, it would make no difference to the international economy. The amount of money that passes through the Barbados system is so little. I'm quite sure that large merchant banks in New York deal with more money than our total money supply. Large corporations have more money than our total money supply. Apple has more money than our total money supply. We are minuscule. And not just us. If we minuscule, what do you think about Antigua and St. Lucia and Dominica? But somehow they predetermined that Barbados represents, because we've not graduated from the FATF system, that we represent a high risk. They had agreed to consult with us, and they have not consulted with us. I'm not going to go into the minutiae, but I say to this chamber that the EU have had no discussion with the government of Barbados or its agents. They've had no discussion with me as the minister responsible for dealing with the money laundering issues. None whatsoever. But yet still, they are pretending that we had these discussions. I saw a piece of correspondence from one EU head which said that in the margins of a CFATF meeting in Antigua, our representative mentioned to the director of the FATF that these things were, now how that get to be a consultation with Barbados? That is like saying that in the margins of the CPA meeting that they spoke to the Commonwealth Secretary General and therefore Barbados should know. That's the equivalent of it. Absolutely no consultation. Now, we are fighting this tooth and nail. We are prepared, if necessary, to litigate the EU stance in various international fora. Not just because it has the ability to cripple our financial system, but because of the principle which says that you cannot judge and convict a man unless he has an opportunity to be heard. Now, let me remind this chamber in Barbados that we passed this way before. We passed this way with the OECD in the late 1990s, when the OECD determined that, Barbados was a harmful tax jurisdiction, and they were therefore going to shut us down. Under the leadership of now deceased former Prime Minister Owen Arthur, may he rest in peace, we had to devote a large amount of government resources to fighting the OECD. And we fought them on matters of principle. It wasn't just a case of Barbados is a small country, you should leave us alone. It wasn't that. That was not our argument. Our argument was that if you're going to make determinations that affect our future and our ability to earn a livelihood, then we have to have a seat at the table. And on that occasion, we established an organization of small states, all of whom had similar interests. And it was a body established to counter the might of on that occasion, the OECD. So by now, countries like us should probably be getting accustomed to the attitude of the big and the mighty. And the Minister in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will identify immediately with the many instances across the many fora where countries and groupings make decisions and determinations about what we are and about what we should do. We, in an effort to deal with the harmful tax problem, we took a decision to remove the ring fencing of international business companies. It was a commitment that was given by the last government on the eve of leaving government, and they left it for us to deal with. But that's all right, we're accustomed. And we dealt with it in a way that we think can work for Barbados. And we reduced everybody's corporation tax to a single set of bands. The highest is 5%. So if you are what used to be called an offshore company, you start at 5%. If you're a local company, whether you are Cave Shepherd or your mom and pop operation selling sweeties, as long as you're a company, 5%. Would you believe, Madam Chair, that the same people who said that we needed to adjust our tax regime, we needed to get rid of the ring fencing, we needed to stop having Barbadian companies at this high rate and the overseas companies at this low rate, and we needed to put everybody on the same level. No sooner than we did that they started to say, well, we don't feel you taxing enough. We think that your tax rate should really be 12.5%. No. You know, I'm known by now in certain circles to tell the story of Sisyphus. And for those of you in the chamber, and probably only one or two, who are not Greek and Latin scholars, or who have not sat at the feet of teachers who trouble to teach them those things, I really hope they still do. Sisyphus was a king who was punished by the gods, and his punishment was that every day, his punishment was that he had to roll a boulder up a steep hill. And he would get it to the top of the hill in the evening, and the gods would roll it back down. And the next morning, Sisyphus has to start all over again and roll that boulder right to the top of the hill, and that night, the gods roll it back down. So Sisyphus was doomed to be forever doing that which the gods required him to do, but that which they effectively prevented him from satisfying. And so in just about every area of Barbados activity, no sooner than we reach a particular goalpost, the reaching of that goalpost is rendered nugatory because somehow they're not satisfied with what we've done. And that is exactly what we're facing here. Now, which brings me then, with that brief summary, to what we are about. The last administration paid a gentleman who was at the time the General Secretary of the Democratic Labour Party. I will concede that when I became Attorney General and took the responsibility of the FATF back in 2006, that he was the director of the FATF. He resigned shortly thereafter. And they gave him a consultancy and paid him, I think the figure ended up being just about $300,000. In a mad scramble to try to see if in the dying days of their administration, they could get something done, because they finally had to wake up and recognize what was at stake. But they paid him $300,000. We got nothing done. As I've met with the individuals who had to work with that particular consultant, they concede that we got nothing done. But I don't have to leave it to subjective view. We can look at the outcome of the last FATF report, the one that was published in 2017, and you would see that we got nothing done. It was $300,000 wasted dollars paid to the General Secretary of the Democratic Labour Party. Now, one of the challenges that we face is scarcity of resources. I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about manpower. Because most of our regulatory units are small. And those regulators are the same ones who have to work with us on achieving the FATF benchmarks. But equally, their worldview and exposure is limited, because they come to work every day working on a particular thing, but they don't have the benefit of knowing what Pakistan did. They don't have the benefit of knowing how Yugoslavia solved this problem. They don't have the benefit of knowing how the United States addressed a particular issue.
Honourable Member, you have 2 minutes left.
Oh my goodness. They don't have the benefit of that. So, because they're excellent officers for the most part, but they simply can't manage their day-to-day work and still spend all the rest of the time dealing with FATF issues. So it was important for us to engage some of the finest consultants in the world, some of the finest minds in the world who have addressed not just the easy ones, but who have worked for the hard ones like Pakistan and India and so on. And for the last 18 months, we had the benefit of those consultants working for Barbados. Now, the leader of the opposition will recognize that there was no money in any estimates previously to pay them. But they worked for us. They worked for us because of the generosity of Ad Talem, better known as Ross University. And ACAMS is a part or closely affiliated to them. And they recognized that we had a particular challenge, and they came to us early and said, AG, we have some resources. We're not just a medical school. We have some resources that we can make available to you. We want to form a partnership with Barbados. We are here. We are here to stay. And if we come here as an organization, as a university, and you still have problems on the other side, then we got problems. So we're willing to make resources available to you, and they did. They made those resources available to us gratis for a year and a half. We benefited greatly from their oversight and from their hard work, and our people have learned through working alongside those consultants. But we now have to go the rest of the way. But of course, you can't expect everything for free. And so we are now in a place where we have agreed that for the next 18 months, we will have the benefit of the same consultants. They know us, they know our players, they know how we work. And this amount of $850,000, Barbados represents the first 3 tranches. Now, I reiterate that this company, it's a small Canadian organization, but they are the principal advisors for many other governments across the world on this very area. And they have achieved great success. And we believe that we are getting value for money by engaging in this consultancy. As I said, this represents the first 3 tranches. The final tranche will be in the next financial year, and therefore it isn't accounted for here. And with those words, I ask that this chamber give its approval to this particular resolution.
Second. Second.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, ma'am. And just briefly to say a couple of things, which I hope carry some merit, some worth. It would have been good, and maybe I missed it. Maybe it was done previously, and maybe I missed it. But it would have been good or better if the Parliament had been, and the public of Barbados could have been advised as to the generosity of the Ross Institution with respect to helping to facilitate this type of consultancy services for the government of Barbados. I don't think it is necessarily the best thing, and I do apologize if it had been stated publicly or in these precincts and I missed it for whatever reason. But I don't think it's the best thing that it is only at this moment, after a year, that we're hearing that the government, the people of Barbados benefited from the generosity of the Ross Institution with respect to helping with the provision of these consultancy services. I would always be all for anything that improves the quality of functionality attaching to institutions that we put in place to help to present a better image of Barbados, and indeed in reality to make Barbados a better jurisdiction for business and financial practices. We understand totally on this side that we have to face the world. We are part of a global community. We have commitments under our arrangements with various institutions. And we're also subject sometimes to the whims and fancies of these institutions as they flex their muscles in ways which disadvantage us. We are aware of all of that. So we will always support from this side any improvement in the quality of functionality attaching to those institutions which we put in place to improve our image to the world and our ability to meet our obligations at home and abroad. So if there's a consultancy to be entered into, which helps us to sharpen the skills over which we are deficient at home, certainly I would want to add my voice in support of that. It is hard to put policies in place which meet the approval of the Barbadian public, or which meet the approval of the global institutional public, but then we have to be able to give effect and properly implement those policies. And sometimes that is a failing. In fact, that's a failing even of developed states, sometimes far less developing states such as we are. So I would want to support any measure, any legitimate and proper measure put in place to help us to improve our platform, our architecture for taking a responsible place in the global community and being as cautious and careful in oversight at home as we can be to avoid any detriment either to our image or to our economy. It would be good if we could hear, I know the Honourable Attorney General did attempt to give a little bit of information re this particular consultancy entity. I would have to ask, and I hope I don't offend by asking that, is it totally an overseas-based consultancy into which we are entering this agreement and these arrangements? Or does, in fact, this entity have local, domestic connections who will benefit financially from the arrangements? If, in fact, there are domestic and local entities, whether they be legal or otherwise, who are benefiting from the financial arrangements, I think we should be told. Do not think we should be left to, it should be left for us to assume that they are not, or to assume that they are, or to speculate, or to fall subject to any measure of rumor. So if there are domestic entities identified with this particular group for whom this money is being sought, I would want to urge that we be told. If there is not, if that is not the case, I think it would be equally important to say so that that matter is not an issue in anybody's minds. I certainly would not want to stand in the way of government doing what it can to, as I said, improve our situation with respect to these matters. But we want to be able, as Barbadians, to be the beneficiaries as far as possible and as far as is prudent and practical to the arrangements fully attaching to these things. So if there is any local or domestic entity, whether it be a legal entity or any type of entity that will benefit from these arrangements, I would want to urge that be said. And if there's not, I would want to suggest that it ought to be said to clear it with respect to that issue. Now, these folks are going to be getting 840. That's a lot of money. And I believe the Attorney General, the Honourable Attorney General, has said sufficient to suggest that it is money being prudently spent. One would wonder, though, how far we are going to be taking this matter. This money will cover a certain period. Are there further payments, therefore, to be made? And for how long a period do we expect to be involved in this arrangement with this consultancy? These are some of the issues, queries, ma'am, that I have, and I simply put them for consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add my voice to this very important resolution and to support certainly the AG's very masterful presentation. The reality is that Barbados is very small relative to the global financial system, but the impact that these requirements have, these standards have on our ability to engage the world, especially now, Madam Chair, in the context of COVID-19, cannot be underscored. And whilst the resolution speaks to work that is being supported externally to the government of Barbados, the reality of our circumstances is that every time there is any negative reference to Barbados on any list, Madam Chair, it creates ripples that we cannot afford to have done. And the truth is, given our thrust to engage the world, Madam Chair, differently, we recognize that over the past, certainly 20 years as I have become a professional economist, we have had a range of issues, Madam Chair, that whether it is trade issues, whether it was issues related to WTO, from that perspective, now you're talking about money laundering, and to the extent that you have terrorism financing and the perspective that the standards that are set, certainly in the metropolitan countries, and the demands that it creates on us as small open economies trying to ensure that we navigate a global environment that allows for our citizens, our businesses, however small, however large, to actually be able to conduct business externally. We've had some long-standing issues with respect to correspondent banking, which have not yet been completely resolved, but to the extent that you have negative references for reasons which, as the Attorney General had clearly articulated, no basis with respect to consultation, but the impact that it has on our ability as a country to, first of all, keep the business that we already have here, because, to be truthful, if you can't pay for something, Madam Chair, because there's no bank or institution outside of Barbados that is prepared to engage in the transaction, then it means that whether it is the coconut vendor, Madam Chair, whether it's the insurance company in Barbados, Madam Chair, our ability to run this economy relies very firmly on the government and the various stakeholders being able to ensure that we can, in a sense, keep at bay those standards, those changing goalposts, if you like, and to fight them. And certainly the Barbados Labour Party has been known to do just that, to fight and continue to press our case with respect to being able to engage in, whether it's free trade, fair trade, whatever it is, to do so on as level a playing field as they could be, knowing what the rules are. And we've seen certainly over the last few years, every time we reach a particular benchmark, the changing of the goalposts happens, and that creates a whole ripple effect with respect to the demands on the time of not just public servants, but it actually, literally, with respect to the banks and the financial institutions, which are critical to the conduct of commerce, critical to the stability of the economy. We have to ensure that we do what we can to be able to clear the space so that if we want business to grow, then we have to be able to actually engage in activity. And this particular resolution this morning is intended to help to remedy some of that, because at the end of the day, Madam Chair, we have always taken a position that if we want to get out of something quickly, that we have to ensure that we get the best possible expertise available, and that in so doing we can raise, in a sense, to some extent, the awareness, not just within the context of the public sector, but certainly sensitizing the other economic agents, Madam Chair, in the economy with respect to being able to understand the true impact that these things have on us. And it cannot be underscored. So during this COVID pandemic, Madam Chair, certainly with the cessation of commercial flights and bringing of visitors and business travelers globally, but certainly it's impacted Barbados. One of the things that we were conscious of was that the stability of our financial system, both domestically as well as internationally, Madam Chair, we felt confident at the beginning that this would be a path that would allow Barbados to be able to see ourselves through. Of course, the negative reference by the EU and some of the countries with respect to Barbados changed that. And certainly for the last 3 months, the government has intensified its working group across all of the regulatory agencies, including Central Bank, Customs, the FIU. I know the AG would have mentioned some of this. Every week, meeting to ensure that we can accelerate the work within the context of Barbados being able to get off of these lists faster. And it is not an easy exercise, because whilst the government has been responding to the needs of ordinary Barbadians during this COVID pandemic, we've also had to fight on another front with respect to being able to defend the country's, not just reputation, but our ability to actually do trade. It actually had an impact on the entities that are here in Barbados being able to execute transactions globally. And the reality, Madam Chair, is that we can't see ourselves only for what we see happening physically here in Barbados. Because if companies cannot execute from Barbados their business, then it means that they will go elsewhere. And therefore, our thrust is that we have to ensure that we have the necessary support and systems in place to be better at the regulations that we have set for ourselves, and to use, in a sense, these standards as a mechanism to regulate for growth in the economy going forward. And it is turning that on its head, which we believe that we'll be able to attract more business to the country and use the very regulations themselves as a competitive tool. Now, it is a difficult thing, but it means that everybody has to up their game with respect to being able to get through the hard crunch, but then for the private sector then to understand what benefits us fighting on this front will bring to bear with respect to what happens in the domestic space. And it's nothing, it's one of those unseen things but when it's gone, Madam Chair, you know it. And this particular supplementary to support this work, I believe, is absolutely critical. Certainly from our perspective in the Ministry of Finance, it is critical to maintaining a very critical part of the revenue stream. And it's something that as we move forward, we want to expand business in Barbados and to create the pillars through which we can engage the world much more aggressively. And therefore, we have to not just see these as nuisances with respect to responding to regulation, but I think we have to turn it on its head in order to ensure that we can deliver a better life for all of our people. So, yes, we're engaging these consultants. There's a cost to doing business in the world. And the reality is that if Barbados has always been a leader, and the truth is that others will benefit from the noise that we make. And if I can be permitted, Madam Chair, to quote the late John Lewis, he always said to get into good trouble. And the truth is that Barbados has always been in the vanguard of ensuring that whether it's the EU, the US, the ship rider, whatever it is, Barbados has always led on these issues. And this fight that certainly the AG is leading on behalf of Barbados, I know will not just bring benefit to us, but it will also bring benefit to a number of other countries in the Eastern Caribbean. And so, Madam Chair, with those few words, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you. Honourable Attorney General.
Madam Chair, the Leader of the Opposition, I thank him for his support. He raised two issues, and I'd just like to address them. And the first one relates to I want to give the chamber the benefit of the specifics of the payment of the consultancy, so that there's no feeling that we're holding back anything. The consultancy started in June of this year and will run until June of 2021. At that time, we will not, if we can get out of the process within a year, then we'll be fine. So that is our aim. The consultants have said it will be a monumental task, but with the will and commitment, we can get it done. So we're hopeful that this period will allow us to get out of the FATF process and get off of the EU's blacklist within that time. The second thing, sir, is that the total amount of the consultancy is $630,000 US. And that amount is therefore 1.26 million Barbados, $1,260,000 Barbados. It is payable in 3 installments of $210,000 US each. Now let me say what these consultants bring to the table. This fee includes any travel. And of course, now with COVID, that's a challenge. But the consultants during the previous period came to Barbados on several occasions to meet with our teams. We also had experts from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, experts from Europe, several other people came, and this consultancy includes any of those travel expenses that might be incurred. So most consultancies, they tell you that travel and hotel is extra, but this one, whatever it comes to, is included. The second matter, I think I just averted to it, it puts at our disposal a large number of experts who we've benefited from in the past. They said we've had people coming in from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police to deal with investigations of financial crimes, the Canadian perspective, to give our people here important lessons on how they can be dealt with. And we had experts in other areas coming in as part of that consultancy. That will continue. The Leader of the Opposition asked the question whether these consultants were entirely overseas or whether there would be anybody in Barbados who will be getting any financial benefit from it. In other words, whether there are any local people on the team. And I am in a state of despair to have to say that there are no local people on the team. Because the truth is, we feel that by now we ought to have enough people locally that could carry forward these matters for us. But I've already talked about the dearth of expertise. So lest the Leader of the Opposition stay awake at night worrying, there are no locals, corporate, individual, imaginary, veiled, pretend, nothing. There are no locals who are going to be getting any benefit from this consultancy. I'm sorry that that's the case, because in many consultancies, there is a local component, and that is something that we always support and laud. But there is regrettably no local component in this instance. So the Leader of the Opposition, I'm sure that he wasn't thinking that there might be somebody here known to the government who we would be trying to benefit. I don't think he'd be thinking that at all. But less he was, this team, these consultants are Canadian. We have very healthy Canadian relationships, with Canadian. And so ACAMS, which is an American entity, will be providing those consultancy services to us through various players, and the major player is going to be a set of Canadian sub-consultants. So there's no local body who is going to be getting any fees on this particular matter, and let me say that I am sorry that that is the case, because As I said, many consultancies will always have a local component. Mr. Speaker, the one thing that the Minister of Finance spoke about that I didn't get the time to cover, but if I'm allowed, I would just like to strengthen that side of it, because a lot of these things seem almost like Don Quixote tilting at windmills. They seem, the average Barbadian will hear it, but not quite have an appreciation for what's at stake. And in many instances, they're not even going to give the government credit for trying to cross these bridges. So permit me to explain in a little bit greater detail than the Minister of Finance has what not addressing this issue would result in. Barbadians take for granted that they can go on Amazon and buy things and pay their credit card. They take for granted that they go into a pharmacy and that there is medication on the shelves. They can go and buy a car. If they buy a second-hand car, they can get the car parts. Exercise books, computers, microphones, from A to Z. But in order to be able to process the transactions to pay for those things, you need to have something called correspondent banking. Correspondent banking is not a difficult concept to grasp. Or banks, or local banks, in order to make a payment for medication for, let's say, Pfizer, or some other pharmaceutical company, the local company will send its money to the local bank. And then that local bank has to send the money to a bank overseas through whom the vendor is paid. But you have to have a bank overseas that is willing to take your money. So in most times you say, well, I buy something from Amazon, and in your mind, it is you and Amazon. It doesn't work that way. Between you and Amazon is a local bank and a foreign bank, and then Amazon. Correspondent banking is the term used to describe the relationship between the local bank and that foreign bank. Now, just a few years ago, the region had the benefit of 120 correspondent banking relationships. So, there was always somebody on the other end who was going to be taking the money and passing it on. Over 120. But because of the fact that the region, that countries in the region were on black lists and on gray lists and all kind of thing, it doesn't matter whether the risk was great. But for those banks say, listen, you're too small for me to hurt my head about you. So I done with you on that. Let's put it another way. In order to make a payment, if this were the Isle and the member for St. James Central, St. James South was the correspondent bank. The member for St. James Central would have to be satisfied that I, the bank sending the money to her, have done a sufficient level of due diligence on my customers, the body who is putting the money for me to send to her, so that when she gets it, she is not party to a money laundering scheme. So all the banks on that side of the divide have taken the position, Barbados too small, St. Lucia too small, even Trinidad too small. And I can't hurt my head to find out whether or not you've done any sufficient level of due diligence on this side. So I'm done with you on that. No. If you were dealing with a big country, you wouldn't want to take the chance because there's a lot of benefit on this side. If you were dealing with a juggernaut bank, one of the big banks, Bank of America, TD, equally, you don't want to offend those people, so you work with them. But our regional banks, as big as they may seem to us, are small. And if we do not satisfy the standard setting body that we have covered off all of our bases with money laundering, then the banks, the correspondent banks, they say, we're done with you, and that we're not taking your money. So when we try to buy, one of the things we've been buying recently has been a lot of stuff for COVID. We've been buying respirators, we've been buying various things. When we try to buy those things, and there's no correspondent bank willing to deal with us, then we can't complete the sale. So that is what is at stake. Our ability to trade in the international arena. And this is not just dealing with big things. This is something as simple as buying a motorcycle tire, as buying pencils for our school children, as paying your if you got a child overseas at university, paying his or her school fees. All of these things are affecting it. So it's not just the big transactions, our ability to do little things on a day-to-day basis that we don't even work through. We will lose if we lose our correspondent bank. So this is another major hurdle for us to cross, but I'm satisfied that we will be able to achieve it. We are pulling out all of the stops. We are not leaving any stones unturned. This is too vital for our national interests. We've done too much to save the Barbadian economy and to get it on a firm footing, to have to be defeated because we can't meet these standards in a good time. I will say, and I'm not entirely satisfied, in fact, I'm not satisfied at all, but one of our challenges with the EU stance was we didn't know what they wanted. They say because we were on the FATF enhanced program, which required us to do specific things, that was one of the considerations, but that we fell short in other areas. And to put it bluntly, we challenged them and we said, well, what are these other areas? We don't know what you're talking about. You never had a discussion with us. And so about 2 weeks ago, they wrote back and said that they will only be applying the FATF requirements. So there's no hidden other requirement that the EU got in their pocket that they're going to pull out at the last minute and say, but what about this or about what about that? And we hope that that is a sincere commitment given by them at the highest level. What they have said is, we will only hold you to addressing the FATF requirements. Now, they haven't said to us that as long as we satisfy the FATF, we satisfy them, but we anticipate that that is the approach that will be taken. So I'm glad for the support of the Chamber. This work continues. We meet every week, several times a week, to address these issues, to make progress. Sometimes it's slow, sometimes it's fast. But we are applying all possible diligence, effort, and energy into achieving this target. And with those words, I ask that this resolution, that head 30 stand by.
Question is that head 30 in the amount of $840,000 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Order number 4, now. In the name of the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, to move the passing of a resolution to grant the sum of $314,285 from the Consolidated Fund and to place it at the disposal of the government to supplement the estimates 2020 to 2021 as shown in the supplementary estimates number 3, 2020 to 2021, which form the schedule to the resolution. Head 34, Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment, in the amount of $314,285.
Honorable member for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. matter before the chamber is pretty straightforward. And you would recall that when we came to office, Madam Chair, the Prime Minister, after consulting the social partnership, and certainly with the full agreement of the social partners, would have announced that we were going to be engaging the International Monetary Fund to support Barbados' recovery after the long lost decade. Now, as part of that, as I suppose fortune would have it, one of our citizens, Dr. Greenwich, for whom this supplementary relates, we requested a secondment from the International Monetary Fund for him to come and support the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program. We approached the CDB at that time, and initially it was for 2 years, where the CDB was pretty much financing the secondment of Dr. Greenwich. And that 2-year period initially, Madam Chair, expired at the end of June. Now, as you would appreciate, COVID, with the onset of COVID earlier this year, we felt it was important that to extend the support that Dr. Greenwich was given under the program. The government, in discussions with the International Monetary Fund, agreed that we will retain the services of Dr. Greenwich, especially at this time, to further support the government's work, as we've had to make adjustments with respect to the original program, with respect to the work plan. And certainly we have we are very, very, very grateful, certainly, for the fund agreeing to the extension of 1 year. Typically, they only allow persons to go on leave for 2, but given the circumstances with respect to COVID, they agreed to an additional 1 year extension. And as I said, all of this was entirely possible with the support as well as of the Caribbean Development Bank. And so the monies here, because of the straddling of the financial years, when we did the estimates in March, obviously we did not at that time in the planning anticipate that we necessarily would have needed to do the extension in the way that we've come to be able to do that today. And this is just a way of accounting for the monies that we get through the CDB with respect to being able to account for Dr. Greenwich's support in the program. I think all of Barbados would be proud to know that we have people, and this is where I think Barbados stands out, because we had people working within the organization that we can call on at a time where your country needs the support. And I think in that vein, this is where we want to be able to build up expertise amongst Barbadians who can be global citizens, but when your country is in need, that we can call on your services to be able to help move the country in a different direction. So this is a pretty straightforward matter. It is simply the extension of Dr. Greenwich's contract for an additional year with respect to the negotiations that we've been having with the fund in terms of how we will reorient our budget, certainly for this year and next year. Dr. Greenwich continues to support the work, certainly within the context of the central bank, as well as the joint economic group. And I think Barbados can be truly proud that we've had available the kind of services that we've had in this particular instance. And so, with those few words, Madam Chair, I beg to move that Head 34 stand part.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, ma'am. I do not know why the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central would conclude or assume that the hiring of consultants is a simple and straightforward matter. the only 2 minutes of presentation in this honorable chamber. At a time when Barbados is reeling financially, at a time where the government purses are stretched and strained, at a time when many Barbadians, multiple thousands and increasing, number of Barbadians are out of work, businesses are closing. It is a bad moment in Barbados, financially, economically. And I do not understand why the Honourable Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance would say it is simple and straightforward matter to spend $314,000 for the next year to hire a consultant. Present the case, make your submission, but don't assume that Barbados and Barbadians think that this is a simple and straightforward matter. We have just laid off or fired 4 ministers in an attempt to cut back on the costs of cabinet government in Barbados. 4 ministers and a parliamentary secretary. We just fired 4 of them because we felt the cabinet could not carry the costs. 4 ministers and a parliamentary secretary. But we come with a supplementary today for $314,000 for one consultant for the next year. And in making the presentation, we say it's a simple and straightforward matter. No, it's not so simple and straightforward a matter. I think the costs must be justified. And the time should be taken to show due respect to the Parliament and to the people of Barbados as to how you justify the costs going forward.
On a point of order, Madam Chair.
Honourable member for Christchurch East Central.
Madam Chair, the honourable member is seeking to mislead the chamber because this matter was fully ventilated before. Dr. Greenidge's engagement is not in the nature of a consultant in the way that he wishes to characterize. This is a technical assistance program which is being funded by the Caribbean Development Bank, and therefore to seek to characterize Dr. Greenidge's engagement as a consultant in the way that he wishes the public to believe that this government is doing is grossly unfortunate, because Dr. Greenidge is here providing technical support, which is supported by the Caribbean Development Bank. And the monies that are being voted are simply the monies in relation to the technical assistance with respect to that. Dr. Greenidge is not a consultant in the way that the Leader of the Opposition is seeking to characterize.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Chair, you know, a cut is a cut is a cut. I said not too long ago. A consultant is a consultant is a consultant. Dr. Greenidge is a consultant to the government of Barbados. Dr. Greenidge is a consultant to the government of Barbados. You come in here and you're asking the Parliament of Barbados to vote some money towards this cause. I am saying you can't start by saying it's a simple and straightforward matter in a context where you just fired 4 ministers to cut costs, in a context where the government's purse is seriously constrained, in a context where thousands of Barbadians are out of work and more predicted to lose their jobs if you listen to the voice of the head of the private sector and the voice of the governor of the central bank. There's a context in which we are making this, we're bringing this thing. So you can't start by saying it's a simple and straightforward matter. The Parliament of Barbados, at least those on this side, and the people of Barbados deserve a little bit more respect and to be offered a little bit more in substance than that. That's all I am saying. I'm not trying to confuse any issue or to mislead in any house. We operate in a context where this government, having criticized the last administration for the multiple millions spent on consultancy fees, which is about 20 million or so, has gone upward of $47 million in consultancy fees. We just finished debating a resolution which spoke to the payment of consultancy fees again. I supported that one. And all I'm saying is you can't start by saying this one is a simple and straightforward matter. You're taking the Parliament for granted, and you're taking the people of Barbados for granted. And you have to be reminded that they're not to be taken for granted. In many instances, when these people are taken on and their services are contracted, people of Barbados aren't even sure what exactly they're doing. There are so many consultants around now that one has lost track, if everyone had been told in the first place, as to what specifically they're doing. Now, I don't have a problem with Dr. Greenidge. He seems to be a brilliant young Barbadian. The brief interactions I have had with him suggested to me that he's a pleasant young man who is serious about his job. I do have to acknowledge that I've come to the conclusion he does not always understand all of the political nuances operating around him and with respect to policy positions. But he seems to be a pleasant and bright fella. So I have no problem with him at all. I'm speaking to an issue. And I'm saying in the context of the times in which we now live and the hardships that Barbadians are undergoing and expected to have to undergo in the coming months and perhaps years, you can't treat to the public with a seeming lack of respect. You shouldn't treat to the Parliament with a seeming lack of respect. These people are taken on. We have no idea sometimes what they are doing. It came to my knowledge incidentally, Madam Chair, and maybe I am at fault and not the government, but it came to my knowledge incidentally on the road that Dr. Greenidge was being paid by the CDB up until now. Now, the Parliament of Barbados should be made aware of that. People of Barbados should be made properly aware of that. And maybe they were and I didn't hear because I don't hear everything. But all I can tell you is I came to the knowledge that he was being paid up until now by the Caribbean Development Bank through arrangement, and I heard that incidentally on the road, Madam Chair. Now, if I missed it, I apologize. But if it was not stated up front or long ago, then it is disrespect. And we have other consultants knocking around there. This one, I saw this resolution, senior technical advisor or something. I wasn't too sure who it was about. It is just that I happen to have knowledge of one or two things that are going on. So I assumed that it was Dr. Greenidge, and it was confirmed here a few moments ago. But I would guarantee you that there may be some even in this chamber who did not know specifically to whom this resolution applied. That's a fact. Maybe you're blessed with the knowledge, Madam Chair, maybe you knew. But I certainly didn't know. Maybe the member for St. Michael East knew. I certainly did not know. And all I'm saying is these people are taken on. You don't know exactly what they're doing. And there's so many of them, especially around in the Ministry of Finance. There are so many of them that you're unsure as to who is doing what. You're not told what they are paid. Now, I have an idea of what Dr. Greenidge is going to be paid for the next year, because this resolution has come here. I didn't know that before today, and I don't necessarily have to know, but Barbados should know, and the Parliament of Barbados should be told. If you don't do these things, you are increasing the tendency on the part of people to feel that you're not being transparent, and that when you speak, you're not speaking with a voice which is credible. So we don't know what they are paid, and we don't know what specifically they do. There is a Mr. Prasad, there is a Mr. Maskell, there is a Dr. Greenidge. My goodness, and there are all those others who are very much part and parcel of the public service, who are part of the finance management machinery now in Barbados. But we don't know what these people are doing. Now we have to justify this man being engaged in this way and being paid this money from whatever source. Now, I have a perspective on things. Some people want to claim that COVID is responsible for a lot of what we suffer, and to some extent there's truth in that. But COVID is not entirely and totally responsible for the shape Barbados is in today. Barbados was in bad shape, and we tend to forget that or want to forget that. Barbados was in bad shape before COVID started here early months of this year. Barbados was in bad shape. This government has boasted that they were turning things around with the help of people like Dr. Greenwich and Dr. Maskell and Professor Persaud and others. But the truth of the matter is when COVID struck us, we were in bad shape. Yes, you corrected those broad, what you like to refer to those broad and macro economic fundamentals. So you increased foreign reserves by borrowing largely. Reminded just this week by the Governor Central Bank, largely through borrowings. You increase revenue through taxation, and it's fine. You reduce debt by reneging on your obligations. These things, structurally perhaps, could be justified in terms of policy orientation. But the truth of the matter is when you got past those broad macro fundamentals, those structural things, when you got past those, nothing was happening on the ground to ease the pain of the people. In fact, in the 2 years since coming to office, this administration has caused some further pain to be inflicted, and in several ways. So COVID has brought a serious nightmare for us. But before COVID came, we were having bad dreams in Barbados. And Dr. Greenwich was present then. And these consultants were present then. And for 2 years leading up.
Madam Chair, on a point of order.
Honourable Member for Christchurch West.
Madam Chair, I don't like to often interrupt the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, but clearly it is inaccurate and improper and total misleading of the House to say that nothing has been happening on the ground for the people. I think first of the trust loans. That alone, with multiple people. I think, in fact, the Honourable Member said he gave the first trust loan. I vaguely remember him saying so. And if he didn't say that, remind me. But for the Honourable Member to suggest that nothing was happening on the ground, when he, in fact, gave the first trust loan, and millions of dollars were put in trust loans for people, small loans, $2,000, $3,000, up to $5,000. For him to say that is totally misleading the House. Total misleading of the House. When I think of all the other programs that we were able to do, the vendors market that we just started, but on the highway. When I think of all the people that benefited from all the different programs, even during COVID, and before all of the people that got the benefit of the severance, even before we were able to sort out their applications, we made sure that they got something early, because we're making sure that people don't suffer in this country. But the Honourable Member conveniently forgets these things just to make cheap political points. But we ain't about cheap political points.
Honourable
People
Member,
taking care of the people.
You
So
two
the Honourable
are...
Member is misleading the House. Honourable
Thank
Member.
you.
Thank you.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. And I will repeat, I gave the first trust loan out of my pocket. That was not state-owned money. Man approached me and he says, I hear your government is coming with trust loans. I need one now. System is not yet in place. I said, the man had an urgent need and I helped him to meet it, not the first, nor the last time. So I don't know the point the Honourable Member of Christchurch West is trying to make. In 2 years since the administration came to office and before the onset of COVID, while these consultants were in service and under engagement by the government, the economy of Barbados was still drifting south, despite the macro corrections made, the structural corrections made at the macro level. On the ground, households were still
Madam
reeling.
Chair, on a
Honourable
point of
member.
order,
Honourable member for Christchurch.
the honourable
West.
member continues to mislead the House to suggest that the economy of Barbados was drifting south, when all of the rating agencies improved our rating, sometimes 3 levels, and for him to suggest it was going south is a total contradiction and misinterpretation, and he continues to mislead this honourable House. An honourable member knows better than to say that.
Thank you. Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, he would just encourage me to repeat it. The economy was heading south. You corrected some broad frames, which some would suggest was a necessary thing. That's not the point. The point is households in Barbados were still reeling, and individuals were under pressure. Any honest MP, any MP, if he or she had to speak, would honestly suggest that on the ground, they were feeling the pressure from their constituents. I do not know if it was not happening in Christchurch West. I do not know if there was some blessing which obtained up there in that part of our geography that did not obtain in St. Michael West, and certainly other parts of Barbados. But I know people were suffering. I know businesses were under pressure and crying out. I know that. I know that the welfare department in Barbados was under pressure. I know that the same government increased its vote for the welfare department because people were suffering. And any member of parliament who stands up either in here or on the outside and suggests that people in Barbados were not suffering for the 2 years coming up to the onset of COVID is saying otherwise than that.
Madam Chair, on a point of order. On a point of order, the honourable member continues to mislead the House.
Honourable member, you have your 15 minutes as well. Please allow the Honourable Leader of the Opposition to finish.
Yes, Madam Chair, but I also have an opportunity that if the honourable member misleads the House, I must get up and set the record straight. A lie is hard to catch back if you let it go, and I'm not letting lies go. He's misleading the House to suggest that people were suffering just for 2 years. They were suffering for 10 years even before that. 10 years even before that.
Thank you, Honourable
And
member.
that
Please
separation
have a
just
seat.
continued. The honourable member continues to mislead the House, and I will not allow it. If we have to be here till 12 o'clock tonight, and he continues to lie, I'm going to get up every single time on a point of order.
Lie, ma'am. It's a lie. Well, I will not even ask, ma'am, that you rule he withdraw that remarkable line. I would not even go there. Let him continue to speak. And we can be here till 12 o'clock. Because from his own lips, we just heard escape. That economy was in trouble for 10 years, up until that 2 years, and into that 2 years. I have never suggested it was only for that 2 years. I did not reflect on the previous 10 years. And he reminds us that repeatedly, every single one of them, inclusive of him, every single one of them got up during the course of the last 2 years and suggested that we are where we are today because of the previous 10 years. The economy in Barbados was going south even before COVID. It has gone further south now. And Lord help us. But it was going south even before COVID, despite the structural corrections made. That was insufficient until the onset of COVID to turn things around for the people on the ground. Households were in peril. People were feeling stress. State finances were in a mess. All that in the past 2 years while we had these consultants on board. I'm simply saying, if you want to go forward with the same number of consultants, and especially if you think of taking on more, let's reflect upon the context. You just fired 4 ministers and a parliamentary secretary because financially you were constrained.
Madam Chair, on a point of order.
What is the point, Honourable
The
member?
honourable member continues to mislead the House. There was no firing of any minister. For him to suggest to the people of Barbados that there was a firing of a minister, he continues to mislead the House. There was a cabinet reshuffle, which is the complete
Honourable
purview
member,
of the Prime Minister of Barbados.
I recognize what you're saying, but like the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, that would be your opinion. Honourable Leader of the Opposition?
Well, I don't know how I am misleading.
Go ahead, Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I don't know how I am misleading the House. The Honourable Member, Sir Michael E. sits next to me quite closely at this moment. And I understood that he was fired. And if he was not fired, he should get up in here and correct me. But he was fired. I heard a very, it was a painfully impacting submission to an Honourable Member for St. Andrew, who suggested he was fired without any regard for his dignity. Now, for the member for Christchurch West to say they were not fired, and I am not commenting on the cabinet reshuffle, I am simply saying, if you're going to fire 4 ministers and a parliamentary secretary, and you're looking to reduce the cost of cabinet, you have to justify why you are engaging further one who has been seconded here from the IMF and retaining all of the others. And I have no problem with this particular one. If you want to retain him, retain him. But if you're retaining him, do you have to retain all of the others? That's all I'm saying. If Barbados is under financial and economic stress and government's purse is burdened, then you can't simply come here and say it's a simple and straightforward thing. Well, it's not for me. It may be for the people of Christchurch West. It may be for the people of Christchurch East Central. But I have a feeling it is not for them either. But it's certainly not for me. So if you are going to retain him, are you also going to retain all of the others? Will we not see a trimming of the architecture with respect to consultants, especially around the Ministry of Finance? Now, if I am out of place in asking that, I will continue to be out of place. And if that disturbs the Honourable Member for Christchurch West, he will have to continue to be disturbed. Now, I anticipate that with all of these consultants, it may not be found a hard task, that mandate which has been given to the Jobs and Investment Council, because the Honourable Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister, just established a Jobs and Investment Council. There are dozens, as I understand it, there's dozens of people who are engaged in helping us to conceptualize a policy program or a set of policies that will take us beyond COVID and address the shortcomings in the Barbados economy. Now, if you have such a large network of persons constituting a Jobs and Investment Council, and I presume that when we have the throne speech in a matter of weeks, that much of what will come out in the throne speech will come from the reports, the findings, the recommendations, certainly deliberations, discussions with the Jobs and Investment Council. You know, establish a large Jobs and Investment Council with scores, dozens certainly of people. Now, if these persons are doing the service to their country that we anticipate they will do, then why do we need all of these consultants? Why do we need to continue with all of these consultants in this very difficult time? How are we, in what way are we beholden to these people such that we cannot make a course correction and do some trimming of the budget with respect to the consultants in Barbados? Now, I want to repeat, I have no problem with Dr. Greenwich. I think when he speaks in the interests of the government, he speaks well. Don't necessarily always agree with what he said, but he speaks well, tries to present a case properly for the government of the day. That is his responsibility. I repeat, it is my view, he does not always understand the political dynamics, the political nuances operating around him because he's not a politician. I'm hearing today he's a technician. The fact of the matter is, he spoke to us recently about the success of the BOSS program. The success of the BOSS program. And he spoke in very positive and optimistic terms. And he said that there was about a 50% buy-in to the BOSS scheme launched by government last month. A 50% buy-in. Now, all along we have been told it's a 90-something% buy-in, you know. Outside in the public, in the media, statements would be made. There's a 90-something% buy-in to the BOSS program. In Parliament, we were told a 90-something% buy-in to the BOSS program. He reports after the first month. A 50% buy-in by public servants to the BOSS program. He believes that it'll take a while for people to further buy in because they have to make some adjustments to their expenditure schedules. People have to finish off payments of some of their debts before they can now buy into this new investment program. This is the way he explained it. So he expects it to improve and increase in terms of the measure of buy-in. But he reported it to be at 50%. He also said, bearing in mind there's a cap of about $8 million with respect to the BOSS program for any month, about $4.5 million were subscribed to. 4.5 million. 4.5 million. And if I understand him correctly, just over 1 million represented investment from public servants. And the other 3 million or so went to those who bought these bonds on the secondary market. In other words, people with money, privileged people, as I anticipated. It is people, as I anticipated, it is people who will buy up these bonds on the secondary market because they got the money. It's the privileged few, or the privileged many, but it's not largely so the public servants that will. Institutions and individuals outside of the public service, 50% only of whom thus far are subscribed to the bond program. So I would suggest that there's a lot of success, and I don't want to be pessimistic, and I never told anybody not to buy the bonds or to go for the bonds program. I simply caution that you should take on board every consideration and not simply those which were being given public vent by those who were supporters and proposers of the program. So there's a wait and see as to where that will go. I am saying simply that that program seems not to have met with the success that government hoped for, at least not to date. And if that's the case, government's intended programs can find themselves underfunded, potentially. I'm suggesting, therefore, that you've got to be very careful with every dollar of expenditure into which you enter. Questions, therefore, have to be raised about these consultants. We are in, if I'm not mistaken, a serious period of decline in Barbados, and it started before COVID. The COVID started earlier this year. You're reading the central bank documents. You recognize that the private sector in Barbados, upon which we pin our hopes so often, despite our experience to the contrary, for 3 straight years, 3rd straight year, this is before COVID, Madam Chair, 3rd straight year in terms of accessing credit, which is available in the banking sector, have not been doing so for 3 straight years. Private sector not accessing credit for any investment, further investment in Barbados, because we are in a period of decline. You can stand and say, and date it and locate it back in the 10 years before 2018 May. But the fact is, you had 2018, you had 2019, and we're now into 2020, and the public sector, the private sector has not shown any indication of a willingness to access credit for investment in Barbados. Because we're in a bad economic period. COVID did not start it. May have made it worse. Did not start it, but for 2 years prior to COVID, we were still in a period of poor performance in Barbados. Construction is still on the decline, according to the governor of the central bank. And one might say, yes, the period of COVID with curfew and restrictions and stuff like that, there was the absence of activity. This may be true, but construction was in decline before COVID. All I'm saying is, Madam Chair, you hire consultants, you engage the services of consultants. There's a context in which you do it, and you can't simply stand and say it's a simple and straightforward matter. If construction is in decline, if the private sector is not stepping up to the plate, tourism hasn't performed properly or positively for over 10 years. Over 10 years, tourism is not now, since COVID has come and cruise ships not coming and hotels have been shut down, that tourism has, the average rate of growth was a zero, according to my notes here, I think I wrote 0.7 between 17, 18, 17, 17, 18, 17, 18, and 18 to 19. And beyond, and before that, tourism was under stress. Some instances we had increased numbers, but not necessarily increased spend. Agriculture, you know, Madam Chair, at the beginning of this COVID experience, Honourable Prime Minister held a consultation, a meeting at the Hilton. I happened to have the opportunity to be there as invited. And I heard some of these same consultants, one in particular, talking about what we will be doing going forward in the next 3 months, especially with respect to investment in construction sector and projects that will get started and will keep Barbados on a certain level. I raised the question then, these commitments of which you boast on the part of the private sector, these commitments of which you boast on the part of the public sector, are these considerations in any way, as stated today, bearing any relationship to the potential impact from COVID? In other words, did the private sector give this commitment pre-COVID or post-COVID?
Honourable Member, you have 2 minutes left.
All I'm saying is the economy has been in trouble before COVID, while we had these consultants. So we are increasing the number, and we're retaining this one. You can't simply come and say it's a straightforward and simple matter. You have to better justify that. Agriculture, which also supposed to take us out and beyond this thing, help us to address our import bill and to keep economic activity going, is, I don't know, it's slow to emerge as the savior it was being projected to be. And we've had a minimal increase in some aspects of agricultural output, but at the same time, an increase in inflation on prices, especially food prices, is now at a level of about 5.2%. Madam Speaker, you bring this measure here, you bring it in a certain context, you can't begin and end by saying that it is a simple and straightforward matter. You have to better justify it and show greater respect for the Parliament and the people of Barbados. Thank you.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. James South.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise today to share with the Chamber my thoughts on the remarks made by the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. I was grieved by it, and I'll explain why, Madam Chair. First of all, yes, we had 10 very bad years, and the Barbados Labour Party came to office with the intent to turn that around. We came to office with a plan, and we put that plan into action to, one, halt the bleeding of the Barbados economy,
and to put in place the necessary measures that will help to turn this country around. Why was I grieved? Because the leader of the opposition stated that while we change the macro dynamics of the economy by dealing with the debt, etc., that nothing was done for the people on the ground, that the people on the ground were still hurting. And the reason why I take objection to that is because so many initiatives were put on the ground for the people to enable them to better bear the journey, the long journey, that we would have to take to recovery. First of all, we raised the pensions for the elderly people in this country. Secondly, we raised the wages of the civil servants in this country. We then started to address a number of things in the economy that were required to change if we were going to be able to deliver the services which taxpayers pay for every month. We had to deal with sanitation and the inability to pick up the garbage that was resulting in unhygienic conditions in the country. We had to deal with the fact that people were standing at bus stops for 2 and 3 hours and could not get home and could not get to work. We had to deal with issues such as what was happening in the health system, where people were at accident and emergency 2 and 3 days waiting for care. And so we opened the polyclinics 24 hours and sought to streamline that entire process so that Barbadians could get the medical care that they needed and not find themselves having to wait and allow accident and emergency to deal with the emergencies that were on the ground. We had, Madam Chair, in terms of the Ministry of Agriculture, the feed program, which brought hundreds of farmers, people who wanted and needed land to farm, people who wanted to get the necessary training. And they were brought in and they have been given lands, they've been given training, and they have already started to produce. I have been able to buy produce from any number of them, Madam Chair. We had issues in energy, where we're trying to build out renewable energy, but to create a renewable energy sector that allows the ordinary Barbadian to be able to participate and for the benefit of the leader of the opposition. The ambassador, Mr. Masco, and the other consultant, I'm sorry, I apologize for calling a name, the other consultant, worked with the various ministries that had responsibility for transforming their area of work in order to help Barbados build out new or revised economic sectors that would take Barbados well into the future. Not only did we do those basic things when we came in to help Barbadians on the long journey, having been faced with an unexpected crisis, a global pandemic, this government turned quickly to be able to help Barbadians weather this further storm that was coming now to seek to wash us back. People were given vouchers, people were given cards, they were given monies. NIS was paid out as quickly as they could. It was not as fast as we needed it, but it was paid out to assist. Income tax returns were given. VAT returns were given to companies. Funds were made available for companies to be able to weather the storm and to try to stabilize employment. But we still have to stay on course, Madam Chair. It is not just a matter of scotching what we are facing at the moment. We still have a journey. We heard earlier, in an earlier bill, the Honourable Member for St. Joseph speak about what we face on the international scene. The international scene is not seizing what they are doing in relation to small nations like ours. They chase us all over the globe, making it extremely difficult for us to be able to function and to ensure that our citizens are able to live a reasonable life, to have opportunities for work, to be able to expect health care and education. And not to leave out education, so much is being done. I'm not going to speak to every single thing because I know other members will stand and speak and defend the record of this government over the past 2 years and what we have done. We have spent millions of dollars, millions, assisting the ordinary Barbadian. They can see where their money is being spent. Now, I want to say this. We are still in a difficult situation. We are still fighting the OECD, the EU. We are still battling with trying to ensure that we are able to build CARICOM, that we can create the markets that we need. We are working assiduously to help the private sector identify opportunities across the globe and in the region where they can begin to look at doing the export that is needed to help us to be able to replace what we've lost in tourism and the pressure that's being brought to bear on the financial services sector. So there is a lot of work still to be done, and even more so because of COVID. Now, Madam Chair, you are a medical person. You may not perform surgeries, but you know better than I would that if you have a very difficult surgery that calls for specialists to perform the surgery in order to save the life of the patient, because the ordinary surgeon who does not specialize in that area would not be able to bring the benefit or value that would be necessary to save the patient's life. You don't stop the operation in the middle when it has not been completed because you have financial difficulties. If that person is to get back on their feet, if they are to recover and to continue to do the work that they need to do, then you have to keep the specialist on board until that surgery is satisfactorily completed. And I want to say something to Barbadians. I know how they feel whenever they hear the term consultant, because we've allowed it to become a bad word in this country. And it becomes a bad word when people are brought on, not because you have urgent, specialized work that you need to have done, but you bring on friends and family and call them a consultant, and nothing comes out of the monies that are being paid to people like that. And this earned the term consultants a bad name. What Barbadians need to do is to be able to understand, and this is what we share when we're bringing people on, we share what are the tasks that they are being assigned to do. What is the urgent need within the economy, the urgent need within the society that requires their specialized skills? And we do that because not only are we in a dire situation, it is also the fact that time is against us. One of the difficulties we have in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs when you are dealing with some of these international agencies is their inability to understand that small nations like ours cannot move at the speed with which they do. Very often, they have 200 people dealing with a matter who specialize on a particular area and therefore can bring a level of research and a level of presentation to the negotiations. That is difficult at times for us to be able to do the same because their 100 people in our situation might be 6 or 3, or in some cases, Madam Chair, 1. And therefore, if Barbados is going to be able to negotiate in international arena, if we're going to be able to bring the most professional help that we need in order to win our case, because the point is that you have to win the case. It's not just to have a case, you must win it. Because if you do not win it, the ordinary Barbadian in Barbados will suffer. And this is what we fight every single day. And I want every Barbadian to understand. At the center and at the heart of the Barbados Labour Party administration is the well-being and prosperity of our citizens, and in particular, the next generation which is to come. So much of what we do is not only about today. We've got to lay a foundation for the future, that they can participate in that future, because we didn't just scotch today, we planned for tomorrow. And to do that, we have to have the very best skills available to us, because it's a new world. All the dynamics are shifting around us. What we used to do years ago in foreign trade is very different from what you have to do today. What we're doing in agriculture today is very different from what happened yesteryear. The world has changed. And we have to catch up. But in the meantime, we still have to perform, and hence we need the additional advisory skills and specialist skills of consultants who can help us to get there. And I want to sincerely thank them for the excellent work that they've done. I want to thank them because we see it reflected in the assessments of Barbados, not only in terms of the credit rating. We not only jumped several notches, but the outlook for the country changed when we put all of those measures in place and did what we had to do to save this country, so that we were affirmed by international agencies as having a stable outlook. So I want to thank them for that work. COVID was unfortunate. It made the first 2 years look like a dry run. We now have to grapple with a COVID environment that will be with us for some time, and everybody has to make the necessary adjustments to it and for what it will call for. And therefore, we are working assiduously to change our plans, to change our approaches, to reflect what are the new conditions that we have to cope with, that no one planned for. And I want to thank the honorable members in this chamber, the ministers and their staffs that work hard every day to help this nation make the adjustment so that we can cope in a COVID environment. And I want the people of Barbados to have the confidence that we will always seek to do that which will be in their best interest. For indeed, it was for this reason that you brought us to office, and we trust not to disappoint. I'm obliged to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, it is perhaps easy, certainly easy by comparison to governance, to stand up and to pose questions over and over and over, questions that continue to be asked and answered in this chamber, under the guise of just wanting to know, under the guise of, well, I just have to ask the question. I want to clarify certain things regarding this resolution. Dr. Kevin Greenidge is a Barbadian. He is one of the many distinguished Barbadians that left, having worked as an economist here at the Central Bank, having worked in Barbados. He's one of the many distinguished Barbadians that people in other parts of the world found operating at a certain level of excellence. And we have that tradition still in this country. And he had the experience of working with the International Monetary Fund for some time on similar programs to that which we found ourselves having to undertake. And we had the fortune of being able to engage him, being able to have his thoughts and his perspective as someone who worked at the fund, but someone from a small island state who had the perspective both of the institution, but also of a small island having to navigate an international financial architecture. Now, when we came to service as a government in 2018, it was understood that the task that we had before us was tremendous. So much so that our multilateral partners and others reached out to us to say, well, listen, you are going to need tremendous amounts of help. You are going to need tremendous amounts of technical support. And over the past 2 years, the support that we got in Dr. Greenidge, being able to help us craft a program, being able to write with us, with the Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment, with colleagues in the ministry, and with the economic team, the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan. That came in the way, largely, of grant resources from the Caribbean Development Bank for the 2 years of his engagement. It has been said in this chamber before, and so it is also easy to say, I may have missed it. But it was said in this chamber. We discussed this very matter over and over, because in the absence of being able to raise anything else of substance, I suppose one must revert to the same questions that have been asked and answered. But it has been raised. It has been discussed. And it has been explained the source of this support. But Madam Chair, there's something that we said, and let's get real. Let us get real. We said, before we came to service as a government, that you cannot rebuild and restore in 6 months or a year what it took 10 years to destroy. It cannot be done. The task first of recovery takes you back to where? To your baseline. Recovery takes you back, if you're lucky, to where you started from. And then you now got to take off and walk a bit and run a bit. So not just of recovery, but the task of transformation was going to take time. I feel privileged to work with many of the officers with whom we work in this public service. But the fact is that many of the very strong and distinguished and experienced officers who would have been able to help us on this journey found that under the last administration, they were not willing to compromise any number of their principles and work ethic to remain under that last administration because of what they were being called on to do. Apart from that, if you as a public service do not continue to invest in the skills and the practice of those who work in your ministries and departments and agencies, not for lack of trying and not for not wanting to, but eventually you will find that under that lack of investment in skills, people start to lose the skills that they had honed and that they had practiced through no fault of their own. If people are not being challenged to work and to practice what they know how to do, the same thing would happen, Madam Chair, with you and I. If you are not allowed to continue your practice of medicine, there are certain things that you might start to forget. And so when you have a situation where for 10 years, you have a public service, one, where many talented, skilled senior officers found that they were no longer willing to be associated with that administration. And on the other hand, where young officers were not allowed to develop, at some point you're going to look around and you're going to find that you don't have all the hands that you need to be able to do the heavy lifting. And so we have named all of the consultants with whom we work. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, you know, being vague is a privilege of opposition, but not one of governance. This notion that they're all of these unnamed consultants, we've named the handful of men and women who are supporting us. And, you know, the Prime Minister's office alone has positions available to the Prime Minister that she has not taken up. If she wanted more consultants, she could have them. She has used the resources not to support her in her role as Prime Minister, but to be able to fulfill some of the very basic things that we need to do. And then some of the finer skills that we have not been in the practice of here, and so that we needed to, in Dr. Greenidge's case, repatriate skills. I don't know why we're so vexed about Bajans coming home to do work. We should be happy that we have the caliber of Barbadian, and I don't want to call his name over and over, but you listen to Dr. Greenidge, you cannot help but know that he's a Bajan. We should be happy that we have the same kind of culturally grounded Barbadian who is operating at the level of global excellence, where that is the entire mandate of this Barbados Labour Party administration. And that is the entire goal of this Barbadian people. Citizens who are grounded in where they come from, but who can soar to such levels and who can make sure that Barbados soars with their help and with their input and with their support. And so we very carefully looked around to understand what are the skills. The Honourable Member who spoke before me made reference to it very well. In this global environment, in an environment where you have a previous administration who didn't do much, so they didn't really need anybody, except for the ones whose pockets they want is a pad. But when now you have to fight in the context of anti-money laundering, to fight in the context of tax avoidance and base erosion, these are large fights that we, as a small island, have to fight. We need the ammunition. We need the resources. But I also want to clarify, and I think that we should make the terms of reference of Dr. Greenidge a document of the House. Because the other thing that I want to emphasize is that we have engaged consultants for a discrete range of matters. And we have found that we've gotten more than our money's worth. Because when you look at what was happening in some of these state-owned enterprises under the last administration, the fact that you could hardly get a financial report, you could hardly get audited financial statements. And again, not necessarily because people did not want to adhere to the rules of good financial management, but if it's not required of you, then after a while you don't think that you need to do it anymore. And we had to jump very quickly to a situation where we were able to report the 5th day of every month on all of the departments and agencies and SOEs, what they were executing, what they were forecasted to spend, what their revenue position was, the financial information. That does not happen by accident. And people who we engaged to do a very narrow set of things, we ended up having to deploy them here, there, and everywhere at a moment's notice to out fires all over the place. Let us get real. Because we did not have the resources. So a man who came to do 5 things ended up running up and down across institutions to get us back in the shape where we could be accountable to the people of Barbados. You know, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition warned us that he was going to come with this notion that the financial position we're in today in August 2020 has nothing to do with COVID. He warned us, you know. In this chamber, he said, pre-COVID, before we knew that we were going to have a 31% fall in revenue, before we knew that we were going to have a 21% increase in expenditure as of the first quarter of this financial year. He said, I hope you're not going to blame COVID when things go wrong, because he was setting up the discussion. Knowing full well that globally, this pandemic has reset every development baseline, has completely overturned economic models. And it is disingenuous to suggest to the people of Barbados otherwise. I think sometimes, Madam Chair, when you make something look very easy, it is like a duck on water. You know, you see the duck sailing along smoothly, but you don't see the flapping that's going on under the water. It takes a lot to have an IMF program in place within a few short months, the shortest, I believe, in the history of this region, to not only have an IMF program in place in a few short months, but that when the fund came to Barbados, we said to them, no. We have ring-fenced some very key social expenditure. Y'all are not touching that. Nobody does that. Nobody can say to the fund, we increasing the welfare vote, we increasing pensions, we returning to free tertiary education, we expanding investments in healthcare, because those are the things that are important to the people of Barbados, that are going to make sure that they have a foundation for the very difficult things that we know we have to do. You don't just get and execute an IMF program just like that. And we're not in a fund program to say that we passed an exam. We're in a fund program because we needed that, just like how we have the ratings agencies and we have others, to confirm that we're on the right socioeconomic track so that others can get on board with us as well. Madam Chair, post-COVID, we had an injection of budget support from the fund of $91 million US, which outside of a program may not have been available to us. The reason that the reserves are where they are as a buffer, and let us not talk about borrowing, because the last administration and any administration that does not handle its business well could not borrow anywhere, anyhow, at the kinds of concessional rates that we've been able to get because we've shown good management. Madam Chair, in closing, we fully acknowledge that there's much more transformational work to do. I'm not going to get into all of the ways that we were starting to turn the corner before COVID, because we have to face the problem and fix it. But the fact is that we need the resources to be able to do that. And so let us get serious, let us get real, let us not conflate public service salaries of ministers that could never be funded by grant resources anyway with a technical assistance grant that is funded by a multilateral institution. Let us stop holding up straw men and red herrings and get on with the business of recovery and transformation. Madam Chair, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to thank the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central and the Honourable Member for St. James South for their very impassioned contribution to this particular debate, because as I sat listening to the Leader of the Opposition, because I've tried to adopt a posture where I just listen very carefully to what he says without interruption. But I must say, Madam Chair, that having voted for him and listening to him very carefully this morning, I was quite ashamed, because in the previous debate where we were discussing the fact that that particular consultancy did not engage any Barbadians, and the AG explained why, that the basis on which he sought to characterize this, given where this country has come from, and we all accept, Madam Chair, that COVID, and I thank the member for St. Michael South Central for making it abundantly clear. COVID has taken us not where we were, because when we inherited this Barbados economy to manage by the good judgment of the people of Barbados, the economy was in dire straits, was still, for the most part, functioning. People were still visiting Barbados. But COVID has put us to a point where a large part of our economy, tourism and other related services, no longer functioning, and hence the report of the Central Bank Governor a few days ago. Now, that does not mean, Madam Chair, that we're just going to throw our hands up in the air and not respond in the way that we know that we are capable of responding. Now, I can say this to you, Madam Chair, because I have known Dr. Greenidge now for 20 years. When I joined the research department at the Central Bank as a young research officer, Dr. Greenidge was a senior economist. And whilst this resolution speaks to the fact that we have Barbadians, and I think in our manifesto, as you are aware, we want young Barbadians, and we want Barbadians to be global citizens. And the only way that we will get Barbadians to be global citizens is if we invest in Barbadians. And the reality is, like Dr. Greenidge, I would not have been able, Madam Chair, to join the Central Bank at that time 20 years ago as a research officer, had it not been for free tertiary education at the point of delivery at the University of West Indies. And that is one of the things that we reinstated as a government when we came into office, because we understood that we needed to invest in the future of Barbados, and we needed to ensure that we build human capital in this country. So that at any point in the future, and I say this without apology, as you may recall, Madam Chair, I was the president of the Barbados Economic Society, I had little or no interest in politics, but the Honourable Prime Minister held me one afternoon and convinced me that I needed to step up and get involved in the political process in order to help make a change. And I do not regret that by any stretch of the imagination, but what I regret is the characterization that the leader of the opposition will seek to make for Barbadians wanting to come to the aid of their country at the time when it is most needed, and to seek to conflate that with what the previous government in any way would have done with, because the people that they paid and called consultants were not consultants, and I think the Honourable Member for St. James South made that quite clear. Quite clear. Because what we have been able to do in the last 2 years was to start to put the puzzle pieces back together to ensure that, Madam Chair, that all of the money that public servants, with respect to the national insurance contributions, and let me just remind the Chamber, because the Prime Minister always says repetition is important, because we seem to forget very quickly. When we came to office, for the last 3 years of the last government, Madam Chair, national insurance contributions were not paid for public servants, and we set in motion a plan to be able to repay those monies into the NIS. In addition, there were a number of arrears to private companies in this country, and whilst the Honourable Leader of the Opposition speaks about the way that businesses are today, we recognize that and we resolve that we would repay the arrears with respect to those companies and individuals that supplied in good faith goods and services to the government, but were not paid. And the fact that we started a program to settle those arrears, and then to come and say that nothing was done for ordinary people, I think is completely disingenuous. The reality, yes, the economy is in a different place today than when we started, not because of anything that we did, Madam Chair. COVID-19 is the reason that we are here in this position now. Had not for COVID-19, Madam Chair, this economy would have been when we started the year with our plans for execution and getting the projects on stream, it was with a certain view in mind. COVID-19 has suspended some of that, as you would appreciate. The global uncertainty is there. But people still believe in Barbados, Madam Chair. People still believe in Barbados. And this government will continue to work with the various stakeholders, the private sector, the labor unions, civil society, to be able to get Barbados through this very trying time. And it is important for us to remind persons and to say that nothing was done. And I thank the Honourable Member of St. James South for reminding the Leader of the Opposition that when we increased those pensions, we didn't increase them for foreigners or aliens, Madam Chair, Barbadians. And we came to office with a mission-critical agenda, which he clearly understood was going to be the plan for rescuing this country, but he determined, Madam Chair, that he was not to be a part of it. So when he speaks about consultants and what people are doing in the government, it is entirely his right to choose where he wants to be today. But the rest of us, the rest of Barbados, we are working to ensure that we can improve the lives of the people of Barbados. And this particular resolution, I am proud to know that we have Barbadians who are capable of helping their country in their darkest hour. And whilst Dr. Greenidge has been proud to serve his country and has done so faithfully, and I can tell you, he has been, as the member for St. Michael South Central has said, Dr. Greenidge has been all over Barbados doing all kinds of things all over the government, because the Prime Minister, and if anybody knows the Prime Minister well, you know that there's not really much rest. And Dr. Greenwich has served. The consultants within the Ministry of Finance have equally served. And it is entirely fit and proper to know that we have Barbadians who have stepped up in the time of need. We are not where we wanted to be now simply because of COVID-19. But we are still charting a path to be able to see us through this very stressful period of our recovery, but we are still committed to transforming Barbados. We are still committed to the recovery efforts. And therefore, we, as a government, we've taken the decision that we will continue, that COVID-19 notwithstanding, and we have to manage COVID-19, but that will not be a barrier stopping us from transforming Barbados, stopping us from getting Barbadians to be able to engage the world, getting Barbadian companies to be able to take advantage of opportunities. We are conscious that the longer the fallout from COVID-19 stays with us, the more difficult it is for ordinary Barbadians to be able to achieve those goals, and which is why we need more than ever to pause, Madam Chair, to pause, reassess where we are going, which is what certainly this exercise is about. And certainly I believe that in the throne speech that will come, Barbadians will get that very clear signal as to where this country will need to go. And that has been our ethos. We continue to engage, and I heard the Honourable Leader of the Opposition make mention of the Jobs and Investment Council and having dozens of people involved. Now, the reality is, Madam Chair, we have, as a matter of course, consulted with all of the stakeholders consistently. But the day-to-day execution is the responsibility of the government. And I thank those who serve in the Jobs and Investment Council, and they did so giving of their time because the country required it. And it is now time for the whole of Barbados to be able to get on board again, Madam Chair, to ensure that we can weather this storm called COVID-19 and put Barbados in a position to be as resilient as possible. Things will not be the same as they were in January of this year for some time, in December of last year for some time. But we can get back there. But we don't just want to restore what we had, we truly want to transform what we are doing in this country. Now, Madam Chair, this request of sums of money, as I said, I fully support, because beyond what the money is here, I know that the value of the effort that we have seen from everyone involved in this process in the last, I don't remember how many months now, 2 years and 3 months or so, that everyone would have pulled their weight. But COVID has made the weight a little heavier. And therefore we must reassess where we are, where we're going, reprioritize, and a different set of mission critical items will be articulated, because Barbados, like the rest of the world, is facing a complete unprecedented set of circumstances. And Madam Chair, with those few words, I beg to move that Head 34 stand part.
Beg to second that.
The question is that Head 34 in the amount of $314,285 stand par. All honourable members in favor, please say aye. All honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Madam Chair, beg to move that you do not report progress to His Honour the Speaker, the passing of 2 resolutions in committee.
Seconder? question is that I do now report to the Honourable Speaker the passing of two bills in standing finance, two money resolutions in standing finance committee. All honourable members in favour, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported the passing of two resolutions in the standing finance committee. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 2:20, sorry. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the resolutions be read a first time.
The question is that the aforementioned resolutions be read a first time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the resolutions be read a second time.
The question is that the aforementioned resolutions be read a second time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the resolutions be agreed to.
The question is that the aforementioned resolutions be agreed to. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. These resolutions stand passed.
Mr. Speaker, revert to government notices.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the passing of a resolution to grant the sum of 52.
To give notice.
To give notice, sorry. To give notice of a resolution to grant the sum of $52,453,267 from the Consolidated Fund and to place it at the disposal of the government to supplement the estimates 2020 to 2021 as shown in the supplementary estimates number 5, 2020-21, which form the schedule to the resolution.
Revert to government business. Suspension.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 20 minutes past 2.
The question is that the aforementioned chamber be suspended until 2:20 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 2:20 p.m.